In the main channel of the Yukon River, catching migrating salmon is completely prohibited. Thus, they must set their nets in these tributaries. As the nets are pulled from the water, they are laden with glistening white salmon, catching 3 or 4 large ones at the same spot. But the surprises didn't stop there. Andy soon pulled up a dogfish weighing over 10 pounds. Dogfish are not migratory and are native to this region. This haul yielded only white salmon and dogfish. Although it is the season for king salmon migration, they do not spawn here and do not enter these tributaries. Using nets for fishing cannot compare to automatic fishing devices. It's hardly significant. 2 nets could only fill a small fish box. To obtain more food, they must find other solutions. Back at camp, Andy begins processing the fish. Such high-quality fish might be unavailable in many places, let alone edible. At Andy's, it is used to make dried fish for feeding dogs. With the processed fish, they go to the rack for drying fish. In previous years, this rack was full of king salmon, but now it is empty except for the few they hung. To get through the winter, they will need to exert much more effort, but this does not stop them from stewing beaver and barbecuing it. The cooked beaver meat is charbroiled over a fire and then brushed with some sauce for enjoyment. Andy has been living off the Yukon River for 30 years. This year is unusual for him. His camp is not troubled by the sudden epidemic, but the fishing ban on the Yukon River is his biggest problem. So far, their dried fish stock is only enough to feed the dog team until early winter. The source of food for the next 5 to 6 months is uncertain. Besides obtaining meat, Andy and Dennis also tend to their vegetable garden. Their year-round vegetables rely on both the greenhouse and this outdoor garden. Today, Andy is checking the soil in the garden. Digging down 10 to 20 centimeters reaches the permafrost. Some of their vegetables do not grow well due to overly acidic soil and insufficient nutrients. Every year, Andy prepares compost a year in advance to provide ample nutrients for the vegetables, which must last through an 8-month winter. The prepared compost only solves part of the problem. Issues like soil pH still need other solutions. Andy plans to make biochar to improve the soil. The process involves releasing moisture and gases from wood, resulting in pure charcoal. It has the same effect as wood ash in improving soil acidity, but charcoal's acid neutralizing effect lasts longer. It also provides a medium needed for the growth of planted vegetables and helps loosen the soil. They put some branches into a shredder to create wood chips, part of the raw material for making charcoal. Then, Andy begins modifying a barrel. He marks a circle at the bottom and drills holes every 10 centimeters. The top of the barrel is cut off with a machine, and a round hole is cut at the bottom to install a chimney. This barrel will be used for smoldering wood. Andy prepares 2 barrels, one larger than the other. The smaller barrel is filled with wood to be charred, with wood chips packed into the gaps. After sealing with a lid, it is placed inside the larger barrel, with wood filling the gaps between the two. Finally, they light the outer wood on fire. This method is not as effective as traditional earth kilns. If the air intake is not well controlled, the result might be a barrel of ashes. The effectiveness will only be known tomorrow. Andy lays the burnt barrel down and pulls out the smaller barrel inside. Opening the lid, they find the charcoal they spent 2 days making. The top half is well carbonized and crumbles easily, but the wood in the lower half of the barrel is not fully carbonized. After emptying the barrel, it's apparent that the carbonization is only about halfway successful. They will continue adjusting to maximize carbonization. The uncarbonized wood is picked out, and the finished charcoal is collected. This charcoal is not used for heating but to improve the acidity of the garden soil, and its use is relatively simple. Just crush and spread it in the soil. Among all the wilderness hunters, only Andy has expanded his camp to this extent and grown vegetables so well on permafrost. Sometimes the more effort you put in, the more you gain. This vegetable garden rewards their every effort. After solving the vegetable issue, the problem of meat arose. The state government no longer allows hunters to catch migrating king salmon, making the winter provisions for over a dozen sled dogs a major concern. Andy plans to hunt a moose to get through the winter. If successful, this would solve the meat issue for both them and their dog team. They boated to the cliffs near their camp at Kalik. Moose are scarce in Andy's area, so finding these elusive creatures required searching from higher ground. Kalik Cliff, being the highest ridge nearby, was clearly the best vantage point. After about an hour climbing the nearly vertical mountain, the view was exceptionally good. Near a water source, the adjacent wetlands were their first search target. From this distance, Any moving black dot could be a moose. After some searching, Dennis spotted the game. Andy confirmed it was indeed a moose, and there were 2 of them at the same location. Having found their target, it was time to get closer and look for an opportunity, hoping the moose would not have moved far by the time they arrived. Because the sighting was near an inland lake behind the camp, where motorboats couldn't enter, Andy and Dennis had to use a homemade raft. One paddled at the back while the other searched from the front. They stopped the raft at a grassy area, and seeing no game, decided to search the surrounding area they had seen earlier. Andy asked Dennis to wait by the lakeshore while he searched nearby alone. Every so often, he rubbed against tree trunks to make noise and mimicked the mating calls of moose. However, no game appeared. Several hours had passed since spotting the moose, and they likely had left the area. Andy knew he might have missed his chance. A good hunter wouldn't return empty-handed. He went to the lake to try hunting some birds. There were a few ducks swimming, so he stealthily approached, rose suddenly, and shot. The sound of the gun confirmed a hit as the ducks lay still. Andy rode out to retrieve his catch. Without the ice, food wasn't a concern, but preparation for the harsh winter had to start early. On the way back, Andy suddenly spotted a canoe in the bushes, recognizing it as the one he lost in 2009. The hull was dented in several places, but overall looked okay. He told Dennis about finding the canoe. The thaw in 2009 had devastated his camp, with many pieces of equipment washed away by floods. He had assumed the canoe had been swept downstream into the jungle, but here it was, 11 years later by the lake. Andy flipped the aluminum canoe out of the bushes. It was somewhat deformed, but still within repairable limits. He had set out to hunt for winter meat, but ended up finding his lost canoe. Many things don't go as planned, but life can still bring surprises. Persistence surely pays off. They tied the canoe to the back of their raft and started their return journey. Andy said that although wilderness life is hard, he always enjoys it thoroughly, probably because he loves it so much. Besides Alaska, he wouldn't want to go anywhere else. Once back at camp, they lit a campfire by the river and grilled the fresh fish over the fire. High-quality ingredients often require only the simplest cooking methods. Paired with vegetables they grew themselves, it made a delicious meal. The moment the fish hit their mouths, they were captivated by its freshness. They sacrificed spawning king salmon to have more opportunities to enjoy such food in the future. A small boat raced through the grassy area. The rising river water from the rain allowed the boat to pass through this area. Over 100 years ago, professional hunters were stationed in this region. Andy knew of a site where their remains were located. The wooden cabin was gone, but the fireplace they used for heating was still intact. He planned to dismantle the bricks from the fireplace to use at their camp. Driving the boat to the edge of the jungle, they navigated through the dense forest. Within minutes, they saw the remaining fireplace. Normally, hunters wouldn't build such a large fireplace unless there was a large wooden cabin that needed heating. Time has passed, and nature has reclaimed the area. In the wilderness, these bricks are valuable, recyclable materials. They planned to dismantle them and take them back, continuing the story. Andy knew he wasn't the first, nor would he be the last person here. But everyone who comes leaves something behind. Some traces are erased by nature, while others remain. They removed all the bricks they could and loaded them onto the boat, then began their journey back. Back at camp, Andy prepared to build a fireplace. He planned to construct an outdoor brick oven measuring 1 meter by 1.2 meters. He started by laying a solid foundation with a mixture of cement and gravel. For this, he had also prepared some new fire bricks. As the saying goes, no good carpenter lacks masonry skills. To ensure safety, Andy first built the rough shape with bricks, then sized the oven door to make sure everything was correct before starting to lay the bricks. From his masonry technique, it was clear he had at least a decade of experience. Among everyone in the documentary, Andy had the strongest hands-on skills, skilled in building, hunting, fishing, and gardening, and he excelled in every task. Just from the way he built the fireplace, it was evident he held himself to high standards. As the last brick was placed, the basic shape was established. Now, it needed some time to dry. During this period, Andy and Dennis brought over several steel plates, 3 centimeters thick, to serve as the top of the fireplace. These needed to be cut and welded before use. Although Andy lives in the wilderness, his life is not primitive. He has access to modern technology and agricultural machinery. He enjoys wilderness living and appreciates the conveniences modern tools offer. After welding, Andy engraved the initials of his and Dennis's names on the plates. hoping they would withstand the intense heat of the flames. Despite being in his 60s, Andy is quite adept at charming others. Sometimes, small surprises in life work better than giving roses. Using a farm loader, they hoisted the welded steel plate above the fireplace. Andy first applied some mortar on the bricks, then placed asbestos ropes in 4 directions to ensure a perfect fit before setting the steel plate on top. With the door installed, they had a basic fireplace. However, this did not meet Andy's standards, so he gathered a large pile of stones for the main part of the project. They planned to use cement to embed these stones around the exterior of the fireplace. Rather than merely building a fireplace, Andy was creating a piece of art. Meanwhile, Dennis cleaned smaller pebbles, which were to be used to fill gaps between the larger stones for decorative purposes. The bricks they collected from the wilderness were to decorate the front of the fireplace. Perhaps in decades to come, nature will reclaim this site, and their presence might fade, but the fireplace could stand as a testament to their existence. Andy and Dennis carefully set the pebbles into the gaps. Upon seeing the finished product, both were very satisfied. They then lit the first fire in the stove. In terms of practical value, this fireplace might be worthless, but as a symbol of their spirit, it was priceless. It contained bricks used over 100 years ago and bore the personal touches of the 2 men. They prepared some greenhouse-grown vegetables and venison. If the weather was good, they could still cook here and enjoy the joy brought by a wood-fired meal. Years from now, their names might not be known, but their story would be encapsulated by this fireplace. Andy, with his 50-year-old girlfriend, went to the end of the river to build a hunting blind. This would allow them to hunt animals like black bears and moose in the fall. A large cedar tree was the chosen site for the blind, but it was currently surrounded by bushes. They needed to clear these with a chainsaw before building. In the wilderness, it's crucial to plan ahead. If they waited until the hunting season to build, the noise would deter animals from approaching, so everything had to be planned in advance. After clearing the surrounding bushes, Andy went under the tree where he planned to build the blind on the trunk for a good view and concealment. He used a chainsaw to remove the lower branches up to just above the nearby bushes. Working on a ladder is different from working on the ground, so he had the screws prefixed to the boards. Andy had Dennis hoist the boards up. Then he climbed the ladder to secure them. Just after fixing the first board, his tools fell down, narrowly missing his head. The subsequent boards followed the same procedure, hoisted up and then secured. These 2 parallel logs formed the foundation of the entire blind. As the saying goes, starting is the hardest part, but once begun, the rest becomes easier. Around the large tree, they extended a 2-meter by 2-meter frame. The logs were reinforced with each other for better stability, and triangular supports were added underneath the frame. This structure could easily support more than just the 2 of them. Next, they laid the floor, using pulleys to hoist it up. However, the plywood was large and nearly fell during placement, almost hitting Andy. He had to manually hold and push it into the frame above, then slowly move it into the correct position. With the floor in place, making the rest was much simpler. Dennis handed things up, and Andy fixed them with screws, creating a large viewing platform. Dennis also climbed up to admire the different view. It was good for sightseeing, but for hunting, it needed more work. Therefore, Andy installed a railing on the platform for safety and better concealment. After a busy day, the 2 sat back against the tree. If necessary, they could even spend the night up there without fear of wild animal attacks. The huskies on the ground could only circle the tree, which seemed a bit unfair to the dogs. Andy hoped the blind, into which he had invested much effort and time, would soon provide enough meat for the winter. The campsite, developed by Andy over 30 years, might seem like paradise, but wilderness living is exhausting. The entire winter is either polar nights or blizzards. Andy didn't participate much in filming. This harsh winter also revealed a critical flaw in his camp. Once the weather worsened, he couldn't go out to gather firewood, and the camp's wood reserves would only last a few weeks. Today, he planned to build a platform for storing firewood. Before that, he needed to transport the wood he had stockpiled last year. His campsite, with the Yukon River at the front and a large lake about a kilometer behind, is extremely rich in resources. He had stored some wood on an island across from the camp, but couldn't transport the logs by boat due to the muddy, shallow waters of the tributary. Unable to use a boat now, he moved the wood to the riverbank, waiting for the water level to rise for transportation. In the wilderness, Work is relentless. There were over 400 logs to be moved. At 63 years old, Andy has had numerous girlfriends, but Dennis is the one he is most satisfied with. Previous ones came under the guise of love but couldn't endure the hardships of it, eventually leaving the wilderness. After half an hour of hard work, they had only moved a small part of the wood. It had started to rain lightly, and they would wait for the water level to rise to transport the logs. After a night of rain, the river had risen significantly. The next day, Andy and Dennis prepared to transport the logs back. They returned by boat to yesterday's location but didn't immediately load the firewood. Instead, they looked for a spot with water deeper than 60 centimeters to prevent the boat from running aground after being loaded. They constructed a ramp from boards and plywood between the boat and the shore. Dennis rolled the logs down the ramp, but the first one rolled into the river. When rolling them horizontally didn't work, they tried vertically. Then Andy transferred them into the boat's cabin. All 400-plus logs had to be moved this way, requiring significant manpower. With a full load of logs, they started their return journey. Back at the camp, transferring the logs was easier due to the farm machinery available. Next, they had to consider building a platform for storing the firewood. Andy and Dennis made a bet to see whether Andy's platform would be completed first, or if Dennis would finish splitting the wood into firewood. They both immediately started working. One processed the logs into planks with a sawmill, while the other cut the logs into sections with a chainsaw. Andy, experienced from changing girlfriends often, noticed that none could keep up with his pace. Now, unless it's a two-person job, he prefers to work alone, as women only slowed him down when rushing for tools. They each did their own tasks without interfering with each other. If it had been chopping wood with an axe, Dennis would have no chance. But with a wood splitter, it was a different story. Dennis could just place the wood in the machine. While Andy was still hammering, Dennis was already teasing him from the side. Once Andy completed the platform, he could pile up the wood. Although Alaska's summers have no nights, the workload might still be overwhelming for many. Winter days are short, so everything must be prepared in the summer. After several hours, they completed the task. In winter, they would need about 15 times this amount of firewood, a daunting workload indeed. Living off the Yukon River, hunters like Andy wouldn't miss out on a delicacy like the migrating king salmon. In past years, Andy could catch hundreds of pounds in 2 days. However, with declining fish numbers in recent years, they had to selectively catch some. Today, he and his girlfriend Dennis were arranging fishing nets in the grass. The king salmon migration lasts only a short time, possibly just 2 days past their river section, so catching them depended on luck. With their equipment ready, they drifted downstream in their boat. Andy traditionally set nets at a spot where a landslide created a whirlpool, a resting place for the upstream migrating king salmon. The method was similar to other hunters. One end of the net was fixed to the shore, and the other was dragged into the river by the boat. Unfortunately, the engine's propeller got tangled with the net, creating a huge hole. They had to dock the boat, and Andy had to remove the propeller to free the net. The net was too damaged to use, so they had to return to camp to repair it. Once repaired, they hurried to set it again. Time was critical, as they needed to catch the migrating fish before they passed the area, or they would have to wait until next year. Returning to the same location, they repeated the net-setting process. The swift current made controlling the boat challenging, especially since Dennis had already made a mistake, making her nervous. Still, she worked hard to control the boat while Andy dropped the anchor to set the net. They also had a smaller net, ready to be set in calmer waters. This time, Andy controlled the boat, letting Dennis handle the net setting from the bow, as she needed to learn these skills herself. After setting the net, it started to rain lightly. They hoped that the next time they checked, they would catch some desired king salmon. After the rain stopped, Andy and Dennis took a bathtub and boarded the boat. Dennis was not familiar with boating, so Andy let her practice more while he sat and watched. They drove the boat to the location of the landslide. The first fishing net they checked was full of branches. As the net was pulled out of the water, they saw fish desperately struggling. The freshness suggested they were caught recently. Andy lifted a fish onto the boat. It was a genuine king salmon, and it was quite large. Upon inspection, they determined it was a female with roe. Given the sharp decline in king salmon numbers, Andy decided to release it back into the water. A female king salmon like this one could lay up to 4,000 eggs, a crucial factor for the recovery of the fish population. Andy believed that every hunter relying on the Yukon River would make the same choice. Only sustainable practices can ensure survival. This net had just that one fish, so they pinned their hopes on another net. This net also had branches that had floated downstream but was slightly better than the first. It contained a male king salmon. Dennis placed it in the bathtub. The rest of the net also yielded a few good catches. As they cleared the branches, they inspected the fish. Any females that were heavily pregnant were released. Males that could not spawn were all packed to take back. Today, they caught a total of 3 king salmon. While not a large number, given the drastic decrease in population, being able to enjoy such a delicacy left them quite satisfied. On the Yukon River, a man waved his hand, and the small boat began approaching a group of reindeer near the riverbank. His M24 rifle was ready, but just as he prepared to fire, the reindeer disappeared into the bushes. The opportunity slipped away. The man, named Andy, lives at the Kalik Cliffs along the Yukon River. Today, he and his 50-year-old girlfriend, Dennis, were heading to town to pick up a delivery. On their way, they stumbled upon a large herd of reindeer by the river. Although their first attempt failed, Andy wasn't ready to give up on the chance for venison. After all, the delivery could wait another day, but the reindeer wouldn't stick around. He docked the boat along the herd's path and noticed tracks in the snow, indicating the reindeer had changed their usual migration route. Andy wanted to figure out where they were descending to the riverbank, to choose the best spot to wait. Walking a few dozen meters ahead, they found signs of reindeer movement on the riverbank. Based on the tracks, the herd was about 20 strong, but this location wasn't suitable for an ambush. Returning to the boat, Andy remembered a narrow valley nearby. If the reindeer followed the riverbank, they would have to pass through that spot. In previous years, it was rare to see reindeer along the Yukon River at this time, but this felt like a gift from nature. After half an hour of navigating the river, they finally found the migrating herd. The reindeer were crossing the river, and Andy readied his weapon while Dennis controlled the boat. If this had been the Hailstone family, they might have hunted the reindeer directly from the river. However, Andy waited until the herd crossed before docking the boat. His large-caliber hunting rifle required a steady position for accuracy, which wasn't possible on the boat. He fired, and one reindeer fell immediately. But the hunt wasn't over. Andy planned to take another one, as a single reindeer wouldn't provide enough meat for the long winter. 2 would significantly ease the pressure of survival. In the wilderness, opportunities like this must be seized, as reindeer might not appear again all winter. Both were mature males, each capable of yielding about 200 pounds of venison. Andy remarked that he had seen 500 to 600 reindeer migrating through here. Taking just 2 wasn't unreasonable, especially since nothing went to waste. The parts they didn't eat, such as organs, would feed the sled dogs. Anything the dogs didn't eat would be used as bait for traps. After much effort, they loaded the reindeer onto the boat and began their journey back. At the camp, they lit a campfire by the Yukon River. The venison was cooked with a mix of foil wrapping and open-fire grilling. These 2 reindeer would last them about 3 months, but they would need much more meat to survive the winter. That morning, the river was still unfrozen, but by the time they returned, chunks of ice were already forming. Winter was truly approaching. After just a few minutes of intense heat, the venison released a mouth-watering aroma. Andy used a small knife to pick up a piece and taste it. It was tender, juicy, and full of flavor. Andy has lived here for 30 years and could count on one hand the number of times he had seen migrating reindeer cross the river. Dennis, who had only been here a few years, was lucky to experience it and learned another valuable lesson about securing food in the wilderness. Usually, the saying "burning incense only when in trouble" fits Andy perfectly. It wasn't until the river began to freeze over that he decided to set fishing traps. Surprisingly, he managed to catch 1 freshwater cod. Although it took 2 days to catch just one, for Andy and Dennis, who were stuck at camp due to the ice, it became a fun early winter activity. They happily carried their catch back to camp. The fish's translucent meat looked perfect for making pickled fish soup. After slicing the fish and cooking it in a pot, the aroma was so enticing that even the dogs nearby couldn't help but drool. Andy, never stingy, gave one of them a piece right away. The taste alone made the 2-day effort worthwhile. By the next morning, the Yukon River was covered in a white winter veil. Andy's 3-story wooden cabin stood tall, a structure he built a few years ago. The first 2 floors were already in use, but today he planned to convert the 3rd floor into a storage room. Since storage requires moving heavy items, Andy decided to build an elevator for the task. After taking measurements, he began cutting the raw materials. While the 3rd floor didn't need insulation, It needed to block cold air from entering the second floor. For the elevator floor, Andy used 2 layers of wooden boards with 4 layers of foam between them to keep the cold air out. Next, he attached 4 square pipes to the floor with screws. After welding them, he created an elevator frame. However, the frame was too tall to turn through the indoor staircase, so it had to be lifted through a side window. This outdoor hoisting process came with its own challenges. The frame had to enter the window at a perfect 90-degree angle. Weighing about 100 pounds, with its weight unevenly distributed, Dennis couldn't pull it up on her own. Andy climbed to the attic and set up a second pulley to lift the frame vertically. To save effort, he replaced the manual pulling mechanism with a winch. This way, Dennis could easily raise the frame from below. As the winch tightened, the frame slowly reached the window. Andy pulled it inside while Dennis quickly tightened the cable. However, the winch wasn't fast enough to counterbalance the frame's downward pull, so it took 2 attempts to get it inside. With the frame indoors, half the project was complete. Next, Andy welded a motor mount for the elevator. One might wonder why he didn't just weld it in the attic in the first place, but hindsight is 20/20ths. After further detailed welding and polishing, he attached the steel cables, marking the elevator's completion. Unfortunately, when Andy pressed the remote, the elevator wouldn't descend. It turned out that the floorboards were too tightly fitted, causing the frame to get stuck. Andy had to saw all 4 sides of the floorboards from below, while Dennis jumped on the frame above to force it down. Eventually, the frame came loose, though it was still slightly oversized. Andy took a grinder and polished the floorboards until everything fit perfectly. With adjustments complete, the elevator moved smoothly up and down. It was perfectly sized to fit the floor opening, and could lift 200 to 300 pounds without any issues. Calling Andy a construction fanatic is no exaggeration. While other wilderness hunters have simple standalone cabins, Andy's camp resembles a small neighborhood, with over a dozen buildings of various sizes. After refining the elevator further, it was ready for heavy lifting, making Andy's already impressive camp even more functional. The Husilia region, enveloped by numerous rivers, stands as an angler's paradise. This wetland teems not only with abundant fish, but also hosts rich bird life. Rick planned a hunting trip with his son Skylar and daughter Scarlett for wild ducks and geese. Armed with shotguns, they paddled toward nearby lakes. Before reaching their destination, a duck flock appeared in open waters. With no cover available, stealthy approach proved impossible. They had to advance directly. As they closed in, Skylar quietly loaded his shotgun and fired after brief aiming, dropping 1 duck from the flock. Canoe hunting minimized disturbance. After retrieving the duck ashore, Rick noted Skylar's growing proficiency with firearms. He then encouraged Scarlett to try. Relocating positions, they encountered a massive flock of hundreds, though most escaped before approach. Remaining stragglers tested Scarlett's skills with the 12-gauge shotgun, whose recoil challenged her initially. Persisting through narrow channels, they found another oblivious flock. Removing her life jacket for better maneuverability, Scarlett fired. Though injuring 1 duck, follow-up shots scattered pellets around but not on target. The wounded bird attempted aquatic escapes until final retrieval from shoreline reeds required Scarlett's finishing shot. In indigenous tradition, allowing wounded prey to escape brings misfortune, making Scarlett's success crucial. The novice hunter, previously skilled with grouse, found waterfowl hunting notably harder. Celebrating at river confluence, they roasted the duck over campfire until crispy-skinned and juicy. While experienced in duck hunting, Rick felt unprecedented pride witnessing his children's achievements, considering their success his own parental triumph. As late autumn arrives in Husilia, hunters begin preparing winter provisions. Rick primarily relies on moose for cold season sustenance. Finding suitable targets might take 3 days with luck, or extend to weeks otherwise. Before hunting, they first established a base camp. Leaving his daughter behind due to hunting risks, Rick anchored near a food-rich inland lake frequented by moose. They built camp at the forest edge for visibility and bear protection, crucial as bears actively fattened on berries and deer nearby. While scouting locations, they narrowly avoided a wasp nest. The dense undergrowth showed frequent bear activity, prompting strategic camp placement. As storm clouds gathered, they erected a rain-proof shelter using tarps and timber. Patrolling by canoe through moose-inhabited thickets proved challenging. Rick selected a towering cedar for an observation post, offering panoramic views of lake and grasslands. Mid-journey, a black bear emerged on shore. In the tense encounter, Sudden movements nearly capsized their canoe. Rick fired twice at the alerted bear. Despite close range, no blood trail appeared after tracking 300 meters through berry-strewn bushes. The .375 caliber solid bullets likely missed, though Rick speculated the bear's reaction mimicked being hit. Returning empty-handed, they focused on constructing the tree platform. Perched high, it provided optimal moose-spotting vantage points. Though missing potential bear provisions, Rick considered letting Skylar take future shots while remaining confident their elevated watch post would eventually yield moose.